Hi, everyone, and welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Brian Kelley. Brian is the Chief Technology Officer for the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission, where he's working with on the Ohio Turnpike Toll Modernization Project and working on future technology on the road, autonomous and connected vehicles, EVs, and smart mobility. Brian serves on the IBTTA Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Working Group of the Emerging Technologies Committee and participates on the IBTTA CTO-CIO Forum. Brian holds a Bachelor of Arts in Criminal Justice and Sociology and a master's degree in Public Administration from Kent State University. He is a graduate of the Certified Government Chief Information Officer program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Brian teaches public sector IT management, electronic governance, and strategic planning online graduate courses and undergraduate criminal justice courses at Kent State University. Brian was recognized as one of government technology's top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers in public sector innovation in 2012. He was also recognized with the Government Technology Special Districts 2021 Midwest Technology Innovation Leadership Award. That's a lot of awards, Brian. Brian, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us. Oh, and Brian, oh yeah, take yourself off mute. Brian, it's great to have you with us.
I'm off mute. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
All right.
Loud and clear.
It's an honor to be here with you today in the cafe. I've been following the cafe since you went live. Great to be a guest and looking forward to our chat today.
Me too. Well, we are taking your questions and your comments, and we want to get started right away. If you have a question for Brian at any point during the show, please type it in the chat function using everyone or all panelists and attendees. So let's learn a little bit more about Brian. So Brian, you've spent more than 31 years working as the CIO or CTO in local government and state government, including 27 years as the CIO for Portage County. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Well, I graduated from Kent State with my master's degree in public administration in 1990 and looked at opportunities all over the country, but found an opportunity about 4 miles east of Kent State University at Portage County, Ohio. And the day after graduation, started there and basically walked into an IT director job there, which became the CIO, and worked with 18 elected officials in a very challenging environment to integrate technology across the enterprise. And one of my accomplishments that I'm most proud of was our ability to integrate and implement one of the first integrated court systems in county government, not only in Ohio, but in the country.
So I mentioned at the outset that you've got a couple of degrees from Kent State University, and it feels like that's part of your genetic code. In fact, it seems that your parents both went to Kent State University as well. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so my parents both attended and graduated from Kent State University. They met in the library on campus. And I now have an office that overlooks that library. So, I kind of pinch myself when I'm there on campus. But they met there on campus. While I wasn't conceived there, I like to think that maybe the thought of me was conceived there by my parents. And my parents, several aunts and uncles, attended Kent State University and graduated there. My sister, a number of cousins. And my mother was a trustee for one of the Kent State campuses for 30 years. So it was a really honor and privilege for me to return to Kent State in 2004 as an adjunct professor.
Now, Brian, we know you and your career from the Ohio Turnpike, and I understand that you first applied for a job at the Ohio Turnpike in 1992. But you didn't actually get a job until 2017. So how did that come about?
So, after a couple of years in Portage County, I saw an opportunity here at the Ohio Turnpike for their head technology position. So I applied for it, was interviewed, was not selected for the position. So I went back to Portage County for 25 more years. And in the summer of 2017, I was at a state meeting in Columbus, Ohio, and I heard a familiar voice coming up behind me calling my name. And that voice was Randy Cole. And Randy and I had met years earlier when we were both in different places. We worked together on an open data work group for then Governor Kasich. And Randy was all excited to see me that day. And he told me that his chief technology officer had retired and that he wanted to have coffee with me. And I was real excited by that invitation, wondering what he wanted to talk about. And then he explained he wanted to pick my brain to see who I'd recommend he reach out to. And so I thought for a second or two and recommended the person that I could best recommend, which was myself. So I applied for the position, was interviewed, and came to the Turnpike in September of 2017.
Now, Brian, you have the teaching bug in you. And as we've talked about before, you're an adjunct professor and teach criminal justice and public administration courses at Kent State. I'm curious to know if any of that coursework comes in handy at the Ohio Turnpike.
Absolutely. At the request of Kent State, I created a graduate course on public sector information technology management. And I've been teaching that course for 17 years. And that helps me to stay current with my knowledge and understanding of innovative technology and being able to communicate to others and explain that technology. And then I also teach a graduate strategic planning course. And in that course, I've incorporated strategic planning for infrastructure and specifically looking at strategic planning in the past for infrastructure and now looking at strategic planning for the future related to autonomous and connected electric vehicles, Hyperloop, unmanned air systems. And so I'm helping to prepare the students that are going into government roles in the future to be well prepared when they step into their new positions and are faced with what we're dealing with today in both government and transportation.
Our guest today is Brian Kelley. He's the Chief Technology Officer for the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission. We're talking about teaching and Kent State University and criminal justice and public policy. And we are taking your questions. Please send us your questions in the chat function using everyone or all panelists and attendees. Now, Brian, everybody's got a COVID story. And some of these stories are stories of hardship and sadness. You have a really happy COVID story. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I definitely do. So right before COVID began, I was in a new members class at church and met the other individuals in the program. And one woman, met her there. And when COVID began, we connected briefly on LinkedIn just to check in and see how each other were doing. And our church had started small groups. And I was a leader of a small group. And so I sent her a message through LinkedIn saying, hey, if you want to be in a small group, join my group. And she said she had already signed up but hadn't heard anything. So she joined my small group, and her name is Denise. And after many months of COVID and small group meetings, we decided just to go out to dinner, two lonely people, and went out to dinner in August of 2020 and never stopped seeing one another. So after about 3 weeks of dating, we pretty much knew that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. And in June of this past summer, we were married. So
wow.
COVID drastically has changed our lives in a very awesome way.
Wow, that is such a great story. And we've got a picture here of you and Denise. Tell us about this picture. What were the circumstances behind that?
This was actually her office party this past Saturday. So
Ah,
um, it was a Kentucky Derby race theme party, and so I'm wearing my Derby hat there, and she had a hat on before she took the pictures. So we had a lot of fun at that event.
that's great. That's great. Well, Brian, I know what a lot of people are going to want to hear about is the Toll Excellence Award that the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission won, and you received the award on behalf of the Turnpike in Anaheim. And the title of the Turnpike submission was "Bridging the Gap Between Strategy and Execution During the Pandemic and Beyond." And according to the submission, OTIC took a page out of the high-tech playbook and implemented the objectives and key results methodology to guide day-to-day implementation of the Turnpike strategic priorities. Brian, tell us more about that.
Yeah, so under the leadership of our executive director, Farzan Ahmed, in the fall of 2019, we had a leadership strategic retreat with our managers and directors, and we came together. And Farzan said it was important for us to know how well we're doing in all aspects of our operations. And the only way that we can truly know is to develop performance metrics, have strategic goals and OKRs around those goals, and be able to monitor them, analyze them, and update them in real time. So we established 5 goals and established OKRs around those goals. We then launched a cloud software product called GTM Hub that we're able to put our goals and our OKRs into that platform. And we update those on a monthly basis. We evaluate those on a quarterly basis. We get together. We've added other members of our team here to the strategic team. And we've also put those metrics on our Ohio Turnpike website. So anybody can go there and see what we're measuring, see how well we're doing, and see our progress. And we continue, again, to have quarterly meetings, evaluating our progress, setting new goals, new objectives, and continue, during COVID, we had Zoom meetings, but now we've resumed a quarter or an annual face-to-face retreat to get together off-site and spend some time to review where we've been and where we plan to go.
Brian, the Ohio Turnpike's commitment to OKRs has really inspired me to try to learn a little bit more about it. And I started reading the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr, who worked with Andy Grove and many other high-tech executives. And one of the things that really impresses me about OKRs is the transparency about that. And hearing you talk about putting the OKRs on the website for everybody to see really reinforces that. Tell us a little bit more about the transparency aspect and how that drives change in the organization.
Well, while undertaking this is complex, we tried to keep it simple. And so, we're measuring key things related to our goals and our progress related to that. And, then making adjustments to where we need to be. And that became very helpful for us during COVID when traffic declined, revenue declined, and there were other adverse impacts on different areas of our operation. For some, strategic planning is a one-time thing where you create a document, you put it in a binder, and you put it on a shelf. And then over time, you point to it and say, we have a strategic plan, there it is, right? And but for us, strategic planning is a living, dynamic process and something that we're engaging in on a regular basis. Now, one of our goals is to continue to push this down throughout our entire organization, creating a culture where we're embracing performance metrics, we're embracing OKRs, and we're operating around those.
I think a lot of people have the experience of going through a strategic planning process and the document gets put on a shelf and you dust it off 2 years later and you figure out, where did the chips fall? What is it that keeps the OKRs alive and a living, breathing thing in your organization?
Well, I think our focus to keep them updated on a timely basis, to evaluate them on a regular basis, and to be thinking about them continually in doing our jobs. Strategic planning is not a one-time occurrence that you do every 5-7 years. But as I said, it's a living process that you need to be developing a culture that embraces strategic planning, performance metrics, and the monitoring and response to it that goes with it.
Brian, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with OKRs. I'm sure a lot of other people will be interested in learning more about that as well. So when we spoke last week, you told me that you have your dream job, that you're focused on the future and doing visioning kinds of things. Tell me about that and how your job has changed since you joined the Turnpike.
Sure. Well, across the country, both in government and the private sector, there are very few of us that have been a CIO for 3 decades. CIOs traditionally lose a lot of sleep at night. We deal with putting out a lot of fires, and we deal with software, hardware, networking, change, integration. And several years ago, our executive director, Farzan Ahmed, refocused my responsibilities to be on the future. And so freeing me of all those things that normally are overly burdensome to a CIO and allowing me to focus on the future and on vision. So my focus is on autonomous, connected electric vehicles, partnerships, and collaborations related to the same. Just started our first solar project on the Ohio Turnpike and leading that initiative. And working with our IBTTA Emerging Technology Work Group and other partners in tolling and transportation to look at innovation that can transform our entities in the future, and to begin pilot projects, to begin education and knowledge and understanding. So to be able to focus on that in this time that we're living in, where we're living in a time in transportation where there's going to be a significant paradigm shift for all of us as electric vehicles replace the gasoline engine, and then ultimately autonomous vehicles replace the cars and vehicles that we drive today.
Brian, I think there's a delicate balance that a lot of toll operators face between, hey, I need to be a visionary and be out there and looking at these autonomous and connected vehicles, these electric and shared vehicles. I need to be worried about unmanned vehicles and how they're using our space. And then you come down to the day-to-day about how do I clear this, dead animals off the roadway, and I've got to take care of the lanes, and I've got these violations. How do you balance the push-pull between those daily, sort of on the ground, in the weeds kind of issues and these future-oriented visionary types of issues?
Well, you definitely need to pay attention to those things that we're dealing with today on the road, because traffic has to keep flowing, revenue needs to keep flowing, and those issues and problems that we're dealing with today need to be addressed. But the future is coming very quickly, much quicker than we even realize. And so it's important that we also focus on what's coming in the future, because it's going to flip rather quickly. And the last time that we saw this happen at this magnitude was back in the early 1900s, when horses and buggies filled the streets of America and the world for that matter. And in a very short period of time, those horses disappeared and were replaced by the automobile.
So, Brian, I want to touch on one of your passions and hobbies. I think we have a picture of a car that you own that I want to show, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about this and what this means to you and where it is today.
Sure. So this vehicle is a vehicle from the last century, the 20th century, and I acquired it from a friend who I had heard him talk about his Corvette for many years, never saw it, and then one day he posted a picture of it on Facebook and said that it was for sale. So being a red convertible Corvette, I had to inquire further, and that led to me acquiring this automobile. And so it's kind of unique to be driving a vehicle from the last century with technology that some of our vehicles, most of our vehicles today don't even have. So the one thing in this vehicle that I had to explain to my 14-year-old daughter was this little button in the console that you push in and then you pull out, and the end of it gets very hot, so hot that you could light a cigarette. And had to explain to her what that was, because when she pulled the knob out, what she thought she saw was a 12-volt adapter there for, you know, a 21st century technology device. And so I had to explain to her what a cigarette lighter was. But this is an enjoyable vehicle. Denise and I are members of a Corvette club. We enjoy participating in their activities. Enjoyed during COVID when we really couldn't go many places just to get out on the road, and enjoy this vehicle. So fortunately for me, when I married Denise, I not only got Denise as my wife and companion and best friend, but Denise happened to have a separate garage at the back of her property that makes the perfect vet cave for me to store this vehicle when it's not in use. So it was a real win-win proposition for me.
Now, Brian, you've come by your love for Corvettes honestly. I understand that an earlier generation of the Kelley family liked Corvettes. Tell us about that.
Yeah, my dad had a 1960 Corvette, and he loved it. My mother loved it. But then my dad had a little accident, my mom and dad, and that accident was me. And so when I came into the world, Corvettes really aren't conducive for transporting three people. So they had to give that Corvette up. And unfortunately, to this very day, the person that my dad sold that 1960 Corvette to still has it. And my dad still sees that Corvette driving around town, much to his dismay. But one great thing that I had this past fall, I had the opportunity to drive the Corvette in the Kent State Homecoming Parade. I drove my father. We put a sign on the Corvette with the years that we both graduated. And he received a lot of accolades by those observing the parade for being a graduate of Kent State back in the 1960s. So that was a great opportunity to experience with my father.
When you talked about how you were in an accident, I'm glad you didn't use the word mistake. I think about the painter Bob Ross, who used to be on public television, and he would do these paintings and help people with that. And he'd say, we don't have any mistakes here. We just have happy little accidents, right?
That's right. Yep.
Well, speaking of quotes, you have a quote you like to use that comes from Yogi Berra. We talked about it last week. Can you elaborate on that? Something
yeah, well,
about,
it definitely relates. It definitely relates to strategic planning. And Yogi Berra was quoted with saying, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else. And so, you know, in tolling and transportation, we definitely need to always be in close view of knowing where we're going in the future. Because if we don't, we may end up someplace that, you know, we don't want to be or we're not familiar with. So again, back to that concept, Pat, of focusing on the priorities of today but also focusing on the future and where we're going in transportation and tolling in the future, related to this paradigm shift with, autonomous and connected and electric vehicles that are going to radically transform our roads and the needs of our customers on our roads in the very near future.
We know we're going to see big transformation in the future, but we're going to take a look back in the past one more time. Rush Wicks has a question. What are the secrets to preserving a Corvette in such fine condition? Not driving it in winter, presumably. What do you say, Brian?
Well, yeah, here in the Northeast, we're very well acclimated with how to preserve a Corvette. You basically put it on a battery charger and keep it covered for 7 or more months of the year, and only drive it when the sun is shining, never when there's rain, and keep the salt off the vehicle. So that's why we keep it covered and parked all winter long while our world becomes an ice and snow, holiday environment.
Brian, I know that safety is a passion of yours. And when we spoke last week, you talked about, one thing you said to me was, driving is a failed experiment. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, in transportation, we're all too familiar with the statistics. On average, 40,000 individuals in this country unfortunately die in traffic accidents every year. According to the CDC, it's the leading cause of death for teenagers. Approximately 100 individuals die in traffic accidents every day in this country. Those of us in tolling, experience the sad loss of law enforcement officers, tow truck operators, and our own maintenance personnel to traffic accidents on the road where they're hit by other drivers. And when you look at the problems that we're experiencing today with distracted driving, individuals that are under the influence, individuals that medically should not be driving a vehicle, and just, in our society, many of us are not getting a lot of sleep at night. And so for many in this country, exhaustion is a problem in terms of being able to safely drive a vehicle. And so as we see all of these challenges where people today want to be on this while they're driving, it really is a failed experiment, sadly. And so the good news is, with connected vehicle technology and with autonomous vehicles, there is the possibility that we can greatly reduce the number of accidents, the number of injuries and fatalities on our roads. So, it's a passion of mine to explore new ways that we can mitigate accidents from even occurring on the road, leveraging technology and innovation that we have today in the 21st century.
Brian, thanks so much for your observations about safety and the importance of being alert and conscious while you're behind the wheel. And, I think COVID has exacerbated some of the safety challenges that we've had on the highways. And you put your finger on the importance of self-care. People being exhausted, you really need to take care of yourselves.
Well, we thought in transportation that when there were less people traveling on the road, less vehicles, that we'd see a decrease in fatalities and accidents. And sadly, we've seen the opposite. Those that are on the road have sped up, and we've seen an increase this year overall throughout the entire United States in both accidents and fatalities.
Brian, I'm going to make a couple of announcements and then come back to you for some final words of wisdom. So don't forget to complete the survey at the conclusion of Café IBTTA. We really want to hear your thoughts about upcoming events. And here's some upcoming events. Tomorrow, December 9th, the book club that is led by the Task Force on Diversity, Social, and Racial Inclusion, They're looking at the book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. Next month, January 19 through 21, we have the Winter Board of Directors and Committee meetings. And visit our website for to see the full lineup of 5 in-person meetings in 2022. And please don't forget to complete the survey at the end of today's session. Well, Brian, what final words of wisdom do you have before we sign off today?
So, one of the quotes that I've come up with based upon my study of transportation in the past, present, and future is that if you're focused on the past or present, you just might miss the future. So it's important for us in tolling to be looking to the future and to identify where we want to be and start planning our route to get there.
Brian, thanks so much for being with us today. It's really been a pleasure. And to all our viewers, be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road.